speak, and then the panelists talk, and then we will take a break and come back to the breakout.
Reverend MacArthur H. Flournoy, theologian, author, preacher, father, grandfather, even anticipating being a great-grandfather, even though his grandchild was just born. In his spare time, is the Director for Faith Partnership and Mobilization for the Human Rights Campaign, HRC. He has more than 30 years of nonprofit management experience and service in local, state, and federal governments. He has worked in Nigeria and Ghana in West Africa, in Spain, Italy, and Australia, conducting workshops on human rights, access to health care, and the changing cultural norms regarding the roles of women, just to name a few of his areas of expertise. Today, Reverend Flournoy will bring into sharper focus what is at the heart of intersectional justice from a faith perspective and why it absolutely must matter to each of us. Joining him are 5 change makers who have already had deep impact on the work of their particular fields, and we will hear from each of them later in the program today as they respond to Reverend Flournoy. Our panelists include Broadus Esquire, Director of the Transgender Civil Rights Project and Senior Policy Counsel for the National Gay and Lesbian Task Force. Next to him is Ms. Letitia James, who is on staff and an organizer with the Religious Coalition for Reproductive Choice in Washington, D.C. And next is Reverend Dwayne Davis, who is a member of the MCC Public Policy Team and also Senior Pastor at All God's Children MCC in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And next to Dwayne is Reverend Cedric Harmon, who is co-director of Many Voices in Washington, D.C. And at the opposite end of the table is Reverend Dr. Joan Martin, who is the William W. Rankin Associate Professor of Christian Social Ethics at Episcopal Divinity School in Cambridge, Massachusetts. We welcome all of you to this space and look forward to being blessed by your presentation to us.
Isn't she marvelous?
Yes.
Isn't she marvelous?
Yes.
Would you mind if we pay tribute to our vice moderator, Darlene, and her beautiful wife, Reverend Candy Holmes. We're blessed to call them friends. I have a question that has been resonating in my spirit for the last few weeks that has been annoying me. And I feel like it's been born of the Holy Spirit. And so we've been arguing. You kind of know how those arguments already end. And it was like, I need you to say this. And I said, but I can't say that. They're not going to like that. What if they don't like me? I need people to like me. And then that voice, she said, it's not about you. It's what I've called you to. And so the question that comes up in my spirit is, why did Harriet Tubman keep going back? Why did Harriet Tubman keep going back and back But you know what? I believe something transformative happens once you experience freedom. A thirst is born within your spirit to invite others to experience freedom. And then you get uncomfortable because you say, I realize that I'm not free until everyone is free. We say that and we quote that and we sing that and we're quick to cite it, but I really do wonder today. Do we really believe that we're all not free until everybody is free? I've heard a word bandied about, a phrase bandied about, and I've used it myself, intersectional justice. I've been preaching the gospel of intersectional justice. And folks have asked me, well, what is intersectional justice? I said, you know, it's when justice intersects with love and then peace and justice. They kind of cross ways and everybody come together and we sing Kumbaya and we go home and have Kool-Aid. And they kind of look at me and say, yeah, I think we need to rethink that. But I contend to you today that one of the living embodiments of intersectional justice was that great prophet, Harriet Tubman. I want to share with you that in the last couple of years, and I put my timer on here because I know what I'm capable of doing. So don't hesitate to throw something at me and just say, hey, sit down. Thank you. But in all sincerity, you know, I've been prophet for you long enough. The work that I've seen of late has us been moving. Plus, I wanted you to see I got muscles. What I've been wanting to consider, and what I've been bearing witness to, because I have a son, my youngest son, whenever he would get in trouble, he had been charged with going and cleaning his room, he and his sibling. And I would say, you know what, you're not going outside unless that room is clean. There's no skateboard today. There's no iPad today, unless the room is clean. And so one day he came back, and his brother came back, and Corey said, who was the older of the two, said, Poppy, the room is clean. And I said, well, I'm going to go inspect the room, but I want you to know, is the room clean? Because I'm holding both of you accountable if the room is really clean. So if the room is not clean, it's not only one doesn't get to go outside, but both get to go outside. And then my youngest one had a revelation from God. He said, wait a minute, Poppy. That room ain't clean. Corey took all his stuff and put it up under the bed. And you know how I know? I've seen it with my own eyes. And what I want to tell you is what I've seen with my own eyes. I have seen pastors in the year 2011 who lobbied against marriage equality in Maryland when the good Reverend Darlene and Reverend Holmes were working tirelessly. I've seen some of those same pastors come around in 2012, two of whom served as witnesses for the passage of marriage equality. Last month, after facilitating a series of meetings with conservative pastors in Florida, in Jacksonville, Florida, who opposed the human rights ordinance. And folks had gone in before and they said, we ain't hearing it, we ain't having none of that. And the first meeting I had, they banged their hands on the table and they said, this is the South, and I will go to hell. I had a parenthetical about that. And before I see that ordinance passed, and I remember 3 meetings later, leading a group of 36 pastors, after building a relationship with them, say we unanimously support that resolution. We're launching work in Alabama, Arkansas and Mississippi. I don't know who I pissed off at HRC, but they said you're going to Arkansas, Alabama, and Mississippi. I don't need to pay nobody because I got family in all of them. In Florida. And so what am I saying? We're seeing a new moment, and what I came to share with you today is what I've heard from them. And they said, Mr. HRC, whenever something needs to be passed in the LGBT community, you come knocking. You come knocking. You want us to support you. But I had one pastor in Maryland who pastors a church of 25, Baltimore as a matter of fact, telling me of 2,500, that the median income for a household of 4 was $8,900 a year. 70% unemployment rate. A majority of his youth are, if not are incarcerated, are on the way to being incarcerated. And after building a relationship with him and talking with him and sharing with him and him sharing with me, at the end of the day when I said, will you be there with us? He says, I'll be there with you. But here's the question I want to ask you. Will you be there with me when I need you? What is intersectional justice? Intersectional justice is when we're willing to stand up for folks that are not just LGBTQ. Now, I don't want you to miss the point. We need to focus on economic justice within our community. We need to focus on racial justice in our community. We need to focus on voter suppression in our community. But it's not just about us. That same voice that said to me when I was arguing what I didn't want to say had me and encouraged me to say the same to you. It's not about us. I opened this panel with a question. Could we envision a day where we will work just as hard for LGBT equality as we will work as hard for economic justice? Could we envision a day where we'll work just as hard for domestic violence? Is it possible that we will do the work of working on youth violence? I worked with Otis Moss III in Chicago. Murder capital within the United States in a particular, very particular area. And he met with us and was writing opinion editorials at one point, and he's an ally of ours. He says, I'm spending a lot of time on this, but I got to go bury some young people this weekend. And it would be beautiful to see your faces. Where are you, LGBTI community? And where are we going? I was at church a couple of weeks ago at a big church, very well-known church in Washington, D.C., and I heard about what this particular clergy member said a few years ago, where he said, I want all the real men to come to the front. And if you want to be delivered from homosexuality, you can come too. And so a friend of mine has been saying that it's not that bad. It's not that bad. It kind of reminds me, and this is a subject that is near and dear to my heart, because it's part of my immediate family experience, domestic violence. It reminds me of the person that is experiencing domestic violence that says, well, it only happens every now and again. I probably should have put the dishes away. I probably should have done it differently. I have watched my mother at the hands of my father endure domestic violence. I came to open my heart to you today. I want us to have a heart-to-heart conversation. Our communities need us. We have good reason to be hurt Many of us are wounded. Certainly I was in 1994 when the pastor of a church where I had served abroad for a year as a missionary and was opening the church every morning at 6 a.m. for intercessory prayer says that it is time that we listen to the voice of God. This is a man who held a PhD from a prominent Bible institution and said that we allow the justice of God to prevail and stop wasting money on HIV/AIDS research. He didn't know that I was HIV positive at the time, and I don't believe he would have cared if he knew. But to add insult to injury, I heard 2,500 voices behind him say, "Amen, Pastor." But here's the contradiction. The story doesn't end there. I believe with everything that I am, that the divine is calling us back into some of those spaces. It's uncomfortable. And so I went to this space to hear this person preach, believing that perhaps things had changed. And then one of the co-pastors stood up and said the egregious thing that she said. And what I watched is gay, men, lesbian, people stand up and applaud. That happened to be $1,000 Sunday where they were trying to raise $450,000, I believe the goal was last week. They had 411. And so I watched after that sermon, folks stand up and say, "I got 1,000. Many of whom I know from my social movements. Okay. My social movements. What am I saying? What is intersectional justice? We've always done intersectional justice. Certainly we were present at the first March on Washington. We were present for the women's suffrage movement. The FDA would not have changed laws to provide medication for people that are impacted by HIV and AIDS had we not gathered and worked in coalition with people. Coalitions are a part of our history, and it's a legacy that we've been left. But here's the problem. It seems to me, as I survey the landscape, that we have fallen into silos. There was a time where I needed every resource that I could harness, and I sat with Bishop London for probably about 10 years, putting the pieces back together. Because for 3 years I didn't enter a church. Because I felt so wounded. I couldn't even stand the sound of an organ. I used to walk the lake where I lived, and I was working for the San Francisco AIDS Foundation, and one day I heard the Spirit of God say, "I love you. I love you." What am I saying? What is intersectional justice? It is people that are waiting to hear that God loves them. And we may very well be the conduits by which they hear that voice. And it's entirely possible they may not be LGBTQ. It's likely. Do you remember what it was like when you weren't felt? Perhaps you had a time where you felt the divine didn't love you. Have you ever felt lonely in your spirit? When we talk about this notion of intersectionality, we're talking about worlds coming together. There's an entire machine that's been put together to take the vote away from people. I don't know that there's a more pressing issue than voter suppression right now. That controls money, power, districts, state houses, White House, governor's mansion. We ought to be on the front lines of working that every person has the right to vote. That's an intersectional issue. Education, prison industrial complex. I'm working with a brilliant group of panelists today. But if you hear nothing else from me, what I want you to hear is simply this. Is that folks that I never thought I would be in dialogue with, communities that I never thought I would be in dialogue. They're inviting us, not me, us to the table. They say, come back. Not even because I want you, but because I need you. There is a Spirit of God moving across this country that is about reconciliation. And if I focus on my woundedness, I'll stay right where I am in my silo.
Amen.
But if I believe it, that God is a God of restoration, that God is a God of hope, that God is a God of love, but not just LGBTQI, but for everybody, then is it possible that that same God is inviting us to new places, to live in new ways, to communicate in new ways? Now, don't let me get it twisted here. We will meet adversity. The running joke at that luncheon where I had unanimous support for the clergy to support this human rights ordinance was one said to another, so I hear you got a woman pastor over there. The night before we had that meeting, my colleague, the illustrious Donna Payne, and I met, and in short, she was told, be brilliant, be brief, be beautiful, and sit down. MacArthur will do the talking. And I said, oh my God. Am I about to play party to sexism, misogyny, and patriarchy? And so Donna had a long talk with me and said, we got to work this thing. We got to get in here and not think about ourselves for a moment. But how else do we address patriarchy, misogyny, sexism, unless we're at the table? This I know to be true. That if you're not at the table, you can end up on the menu. If you're not at the table, you can end up on the menu. What is this thing that I'm talking about? Right where you are. You don't even have to leave your community. Do you know what's happening with your school board? Do you know who your elected officials are? Do you know what the concerns are of the local social justice organizations in your own community? Have you reached out as a body, as a religious body, to a church or perhaps across the street that you think they're about that theology and say, hey, can we have a picnic together? Can we have lunch? Can we introduce ourselves? The message is simple. We are at a moment in time where we need to get out of ourselves and be part of the community. Now, I'm not suggesting that we haven't been. I happen to believe that you can't be an LGBT person or a human being for that matter that doesn't face multiple issues at the same time. And the notion of going back is horrifying for many. If I had to go back to that same church in South LA, you would have a little bit of a wrestling on your hands. But I've been in churches in the South that I never thought I would be in. And so I'm simply saying this. Here's my hope, is that we can have a conversation about how to move outside of ourselves, not become martyrs, not sacrifice our safety, not sacrifice our spiritual, emotional, psychological well-being, but to consider how we might join hands with others and do this work. Finally, we're working on a film right now on coalition building, and the nexus of it is relationship. You know what I've had people tell me? I don't altogether buy what you're selling, but because it's you asking, and you've taken the time to get to know me, and me to get to know you, I'm okay. Bishop Rawls has already been with us, and I think about a story that she tells about she's doing field organizing work, and she was in the South, and she wanted to come in, and she had an agenda, and she wanted to get this work done. And the elderly black lady who was a gatekeeper invited her and allowed her to come on into her house. And And so Bishop Ross was about to launch off into her field organizer spiel, and the woman said, would you like a glass of tea? She was like, well, yes, ma'am. And so she sat down and they began to have tea, and so Bishop Ross had her paperwork and her agenda, and she was about to launch into it and what she needed from her. She said, well, who's your family? Is that right? Where are you from? Is that right? What church you go to? Is that right? Well, it's been so lovely having you, and I just want to thank you for stopping by. And listen, we're going to be in touch, all right? Bishop Ross said she left that place, and she enjoyed meeting the elder, but she called her girlfriend and said, girl, I don't even know what to do. I had my whole agenda and I had my hopes up because they told me she was a gatekeeper. And we didn't have the meeting that I wanted to have. We didn't have a meeting. And her girlfriend told her, the meeting began when she offered you iced tea. We may not need to join. I believe we should join the NAACP and many, many other now. And, all kinds of organizations. But sometimes the simplest thing we can do out of the spirit of intersectional justice is say hello. How are you? I just wanted to introduce myself. I hope you've heard my heart on this today. I hope I'll open this panel with questions more than answers. It's a terrifying thing to be thought. Is he asking me to go back? I think about the words of Harvey Milk. My name is Harvey Milk, and I'm here to recruit you. Love you. And if I told, I don't know that it is the will of God that we all, well, there's my time. Okay, time's up. Thanks, Steve. So, I don't know that it is the will of God that we all become activists. I don't know that it's the will of God that we take on, those who are not yet with us. But I do believe it is the will of God that we take the risk of getting outside of ourselves and loving one another. And I believe that one another means everybody. Everybody, not everybody, everybody. Thank you so much. So I'm learning in my middle age, if I live to be 108, to take direction. And so our first speaker for today will be Letitia. Thank you so much. Please welcome.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I keep telling them, they keep putting me on panels with people with titles. And they, sacrifice me as the young lamb to go first. So here I am. I want to thank Reverend Corner for that amazing opening. You said a lot of what I had in my notes to say. And so I am going to be talking to you about reproductive justice today. But first I have a question. I have two questions. How many of you have heard the term reproductive justice? That's good. Keep your hands up. Of those of you that have heard the term reproductive justice, how many of you think that it's only about abortion? Oh, that's good. That's good. Okay. Okay. That puts us in a better place. The reason I pose that is because oftentimes when people hear reproduction, reproductive justice, they automatically assume choice or rights or the pro-choice, pro-life debate. That's not what I'm here to talk to you all about today, although that is a part of reproductive justice. It's a very small part. The history behind reproductive justice is that in the 1970s, a phenomenal group of women of color, Black women in particular, got together after the UN Human Rights Conference, and it was in response to the pro-choice movement, because the pro-choice movement was not intersectional. It did not take into account that there were Black women with reproductive issues, that there were LGBT people with reproductive issues. It did not take into account that most of the people being affected by those issues were of low socioeconomic status, had different educational status, all sorts of things. And so these women got together and they said, we need to do something about this because, once again, we're being left out of a movement. And they created their own. And it really kind of was a blend of this women's lib movement and civil rights movement, where Black women got left out there also, but I won't go on that soapbox. And they got together. And so reproductive justice was born. And they came up with 3 tenets for reproductive justice. That every woman has a right to have children, every woman has a right to not have children, and every woman has the right to raise that child in healthy and safe environments. Now, bringing that to today, to our context, to LGBTQ people, and especially people of color, it's being broadened a little bit. And so what I would like to share with you is the way that we are now looking at those tenets from the perspective of my organization, the Religious Coalition for Reproductive Choice. And what we have said is people have a right to have children. People have a right to not have children. People have a right to raise their children in safe and healthy environments. And a 4th tenet, people have a right to health and self-determination regarding their bodies, sexuality, and free from oppression and shame. I'm going to stick on that one for a second. And I'll say it again because we talked about shame yesterday. People have a right to health and self-determination regarding their bodies and sexuality, free from oppression and shame. I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. This is my first time at the PAG conference. I'm very humbled and very grateful to be here, to be up here with these amazing, amazing elders of mine. I have been doing sexual and reproductive health work since I was in high school. And the way that it started was, as a junior in high school, my guidance counselor found out that I lost my mother to age-related illness. And she asked me, I was a peer counselor at the time, and she asked me if I would mind giving the assembly and talking and sharing my story for STD Awareness Month for my peers. I had never publicly spoken about my mother. I was raised in shame around my mother having AIDS, and so it was something that I kept to myself, and I used to lie and tell my friends that she had cancer. And so when this request came, I was like, what? It's not doing it. Right away, I told her no, flat out. And I've always been a very deeply spiritual person and had a connection with the divine. And I got convicted. Oh, my goodness me. All kinds of things, tossing and turning. And the voice kept telling me, this is not about you. And so I made a compromise and I said, well, I don't want to do it for my grade. I was a junior. I said, I'll do it for the sophomores. And she agreed. And so I went and I said, also I have one more request. I said, there can be no administration present. And they let me do it. I was surprised. And so it was just me and the sophomore class. And we had real talk about sex and sexuality and protecting and all kinds of things. And it was there that I had my turning point of, okay, this is where you're calling me to be a healer. Got it. And I've been doing this work, and 2 years ago, I was working in DC at a local nonprofit that specializes in women and girls, HIV/AIDS prevention and STD prevention for women and girls. And I was the youth program director. And I was counseling youth and talking to them, and what kept coming up over and over again, I kept getting these youth who had been spiritually traumatized. And it was just like they kept finding me. Just no matter what school I went to, there would be at least 2 or 3, and they would just start sharing. I didn't tell them that I grew up in a Pentecostal Jamaican household and was banged over the head with the Bible and taught to shame, be ashamed of myself and my sexuality. They didn't know any of that. But yet they just kept coming to me. And I was in my office one day and I said, okay, God, what's going on? Why did you keep finding me? And God said, because you're a healer. And the next call was, you gotta go to seminary. Wow. Seminary was nowhere near on my radar. Nowhere near on my radar. I thought I was gonna go get my master's in public health and become a doctor, and I was seminary. Who? What? But there I was, and it just made sense. Because the trauma that these young women were facing, it was around the fact that they had been given contradictory messages their whole life, right? So for the young women who were heterosexual, it was keep your legs closed until you're married, but then once you're married, you're supposed to be a freak. What? How? Where was I supposed to learn that? Because the whole time I was supposed to be chaste. And that if you didn't know what you were doing, then something was wrong with you because your role is to please your husband. And then for my young ladies that identified as queer, or they didn't identify. And to them, I had a young lady come to me one time and say, oh, Miss Letitia, it's okay that I sleep with girls because, I'm still a virgin. Because that's what they're taught. That's what they're taught. And they internalize it, and they believe it. Like Dr. Jackson said, they're still being molded. Their brains are still being molded, so everything that goes in there, they like, oh, okay. Or I had youth who were having anal sex, and it was okay because I'm still a virgin. It's okay. God won't be upset with me because I'm not getting pregnant, and I'm still a virgin. I'm still saved for my marriage. So when I tell my queer friends and my LGBT friends, and they're like, oh, you do reproductive justice work. Aren't you a lesbian? Yes. So what does that have to do with us? Everything. Everything. For me, in my formation, being taught what I was taught, I made dumb choices that harmed me and my person and put me at risk. I hate that terminology, but I'm using it because that's what it says. Because I didn't know. And so when we talk about being in healthy and safe environments for children, for youth, and when we talk about reproductive justice, it's so much more than abortion. And this is my personal story. It's a story that I've witnessed of the youth that I used to work with. And it's a story of people that I know every day. And so as I wrap up, there are 5 things that I want you to think about as you think about why reproductive justice should matter to our community and to the communities at large. And the fact that reproductive justice is so intersectional that it includes racial justice and economic justice and trans issues and immigrant issues and the gamut. These are the 5. Religious liberty. For those of you who've been following the news, there have been quite a few religious liberty cases going on. The most recent was Hobby Lobby in Conestoga Woods, and I had the privilege of speaking on the steps of the Supreme Court the day that the oral arguments started. Why does this matter, right? Because it was about contraception. Well, here's the thing about these religious liberty cases. If we don't win for contraception, we're not going to win for us. The problem with Roe v. Wade, as much as it brought us, the problem with it is what it was based on. And if Roe v. Wade gets overturned, that means that so many laws for LGBTQ people are at risk of being overturned. This is our problem. We need to stand up and show what real religious liberty is. That it's not someone saying, oh, because I don't believe in contraception, you can't use contraception. Or because I don't believe that 2 men or 2 women should get married, that you can't come in my restaurant. What? No. That's not religious liberty. That's not what that meant at all. The second, and one that is very near and dear to me, as I am on the road to become a midwife, so not a doctor, but a midwife apparently, are the reproductive needs of our bisexual and trans community. I must say this because I'm a book standing. It seriously pisses me off when I am in LGBT space and all we talk about are lesbians and gays. If your research or your paper or whatever you wrote about only focused on lesbian and gay people, then don't say LGBT. And the fact of the matter is, our bisexual community and our trans community, their reproductive needs trump lesbian and gay needs when it comes to reproduction. They are more likely to need certain medical care. For bisexual women, they are 3 times more likely to seek an abortion, to need cervical cancer care, to contract HPV, which is the cause for cervical cancer, to need rape counseling services. Now don't get me wrong, for lesbians it's up there too. Lesbians are twice as likely as their heterosexual counterparts to be raped, hence to need abortion services if that rape ends in a pregnancy. So when I talk about reproductive justice issues, it's not just abortion. It's not just women. For our trans community, I'm sick of trans men dying of cervical cancer because people are not culturally competent enough and they don't have the access to the health care that they need, or pap smears. Because we have laws in place and insurance policies in place that discriminate against them for their gender identity, and so things can't get covered. But then even when things can get covered, the fear and the shame from society means they don't want to go anyway. And who can blame them? So what are we doing about that as a community? Because that's an issue amongst trans men, for Black, white, Asian, everybody. I talked a lot about youth. This is the third portion. But I gave you examples. Our youth, because they're coming from these families and these religious households, they're being kicked out on the street. They don't have access to condoms, access to contraception. When they get pregnant, they don't know what to do. So many things are happening. The fourth is building our families. Adoption, fertility treatments, across the board. I have a coworker right now, her and her wife have been trying to have a baby for 2 years. 2 years. They had to go through psychotherapy. What heterosexual person do you know has to go through psychotherapy besides before they decide that they're going to have a child? Maybe they should. But the legal fees, the contracts, all sorts of things. Reproductive justice issue is our issue. Finally, I want to close with the last, which is a healthy and safe environment, which is one of the tenets. God gave us this earth to be stewards over. And as of 3 days ago, the ice caps are melting. That's a problem. There's no way we can raise children in healthy and safe environments if the earth isn't here. What are we doing about that? That's not a sexuality issue. That's just an across-the-board humanitarian intersectional justice issue. And it's theological also. We are destroying that which God gave us to be good stewards of. Where's the self-love in that? So when you think about reproductive justice, for those of you who already were, for those of you who weren't, I want you to think about more than ownership. Because it's so much bigger than that. And I want you to think about the theologies around it, the compassion, the joy, and the safety, and the good stewardship that it involves, taking care of ourselves and our community and one another.
Thank you, Letitia. I'm Reverend Dwayne Davis. And I'm going to get to some of the things that I had here, but I wanted to answer the question that MacArthur put to us. Could we envision a day when we would work just as hard on other issues? And I wanted to answer that by talking about the moderator's vision for the public policy team, and that's exactly what that effort began as, to begin to have the voice of MCC step forward into the world of public policy to say, wait a minute, we have a prophetic message that is broader than what you think we've been talking about. We've been talking about justice. Yes, but you just saw gay and lesbian and transgender folks and bi folks coming up. But we've been talking about justice and human rights since we began. And so the public policy team was founded in that effort to begin to speak. And so if you have not joined the advocacy network, which gives you the alerts, you should, because you will see that even to begin that practical engagement with public policy issues that run the gamut, you can begin there. In just this past winter and spring, we have been actively pushing on immigration reform. We've been joining with RCRC on the Hobby Lobby case, joining on the amicus brief and signing the letters, and certainly making efforts around creation, care, and stewardship of the earth. Because we believe that we are ministers of the gospel. Now notice I said ministers of the gospel. I didn't say that we are preachers on gay stuff. We are ministers of the gospel, meaning that we speak about liberation. We believe when Jesus said that the Spirit of the Lord is upon me. The Spirit of the Lord is upon us, upon MCC to do that. So we take that seriously. We go out and preach that word. So I want all of you to really engage with the public policy, because the gamut of things that we will be talking about is our belief. And I wanted just one anecdote about it. Reverend Rochelle Brown came up to the Global Justice table, called Policy Team table, and wanted to talk about asylum for LGBT people from all over the world and how we can begin to do that work. And one of the reasons she wanted to talk about it is because Rochelle knew that the public policy team had not only been working on immigration reform, but around the country, some of our MCCs are very much involved in asylum cases for people all over the world to free them from persecution because of who they are. And that's what that intersection, again, think about what an intersection is. When you go to an intersection, the transportation department places lights and stop signs and defined lanes so that everyone can get through it. If you think of your life as an intersection, it only works well when the lights are working and the lanes are clearly marked. If you block one of the lanes, or if one of the lights go out, it's going to be a little bit more trouble getting through the intersection. That's life, people. If one part of your identity is more fundamental than the other, there's going to be some imbalance there. And if anybody asks you to make one part of your identity more fundamental than the other, there's going to be a problem in your space and in your life. I will not be forced to make a choice of my race being more fundamental than my sexuality. And I will not be forced to make my faith more fundamental than my race or my sexuality. And so one of the challenges we have, even in all of these conversations, I wanted to really get to that point when, going into these spaces, especially all of you who have the instinct to do intersectional work, somebody is going to ask you to make one part of yourself more fundamental than the other. They're going to ask you. Somebody's going to demand it. Someone's going to extort it. And so you have got to be prepared. And that's why it was so important to hear Dr. Hobson and Dr. Douglas and Dr. Jackson this morning about knowing yourself, because you are going to be asked to compartmentalize and to make something more fundamental than the other. I discovered that, I'll put it this way, I just recently moved from Washington, D.C., and I lived in Washington, D.C. for 24 years. And I worked in politics for about 20 of those years. And I'm going to tell you what I did in politics. If you didn't know this, I worked for nothing but appropriators in the United States Congress. That means that I had my hands on the money. And when you control the money, you can go into a lot of doors. People invite you a lot of places. People be real nice to you. And my introduction to intersectionality began there, because when people came to tell their stories and wanted money, it was very clear that no one story was more fundamental than the other when it came to human need. People had needs, and they were asking the federal government to do it. And so I learned very fast that, because I worked where the money was given, I can get into a lot of rooms. Fast forward to last summer, I moved to the Twin Cities. Nobody knows who I am. And so you're going to be reminded of the challenges of trying to do the intersectional work. In my academic work in political science, I spent a lot of time with the feminists, and feminist scholars, and I really learned theoretically about the interlocking systems of oppression and the multiple axes of inequality, and these are things that I sort of embraced. And it wasn't until I moved to Twin Cities of Minnesota that I began to really march headlong into that. Minnesota, I don't know if you saw the National Urban League's latest State of Black America report. And it found out that the St. Paul, Minneapolis, Bloomington metro area is the least equal place in the nation in terms of income equality between black and white. The least equal in income, and the fourth least equal in terms of employment between black and white. And so when I walked into that space, it began to tax a lot of what I thought I would be doing as a pastor of an MCC in an area where marriage equality had just been won and everyone was celebrating, and gay people are all, and churches who were fighting yesterday got their rainbow flags up, and it was like, oh, well, it's going to be a little easier to do my job. But to walk into a space where race and where white privilege and supremacy it was very new for me in taxed ways that I almost forgot. And that learning about intersectionality all flooded back. But again, what I discovered as soon as I started walking those spaces was that I am tacitly being asked to declare one of my identities more ultimate and more fundamental than all the others. And it doesn't matter which space I walk in, depending on that. When I walk into some of the gay spaces, I'm being asked to make my sexuality more fundamental. When I walk into the spaces with black clergy, I'm being asked to make my race more fundamental. And then when I walk with my colleagues in the same socioeconomic class and education, level of education and professionalism, I'm asked to do another thing. And I want to give you an example of how that works. So, given what I told you about how unequal that area is, there is a interfaith, multiracial, multi-ethnic, anti-racism coalition. And they do very good work. I was immediately invited into it as pastor of all God's children, and embraced very wholeheartedly by black clergy and white clergy that's involved in there. And one of the things that in this discussion, we have very open discussions about the impact of white privilege and white supremacy on outcomes and the well-being of the black community, certainly on social, economic, and educational outcomes. And that conversation is very deep, and it's very challenging, and people are willing to engage it, and the intersectional, you can celebrate basically, certainly the multiple identities that are being embraced in the space. But one thing that always gets shut down is when you want to invite black clergy to begin to sort of look. Now they can tell you, they can segment out things. They can say, this is the impact of white supremacy on unemployment. This is the impact of white supremacy and privilege on educational outcomes. And they can listen. They can even break it down by male and female, girls and boys. And so when you say, let's give you the counterbalance there. I also began working right away with an organization called the African American AIDS Task Force. And this is an organization that does AIDS service organizations for people of color. And the funny thing is that most of the ministers, most of the black clergy in this coalition, the anti-racist coalition, have no conversations with the African American AIDS Task Force and the people that they serve. Have no conversations whatsoever. And so the African American AIDS Task Force can tell you all of the things that they're going through, all the challenges of meeting the needs of people of color with HIV/AIDS, and have no aid and help from Isaiah, the black clergy anti-racism institution. So when I tell them at Isaiah, can we talk about the impact of white privilege and white supremacy on queer bodies of color, especially bodies that are coping with HIV? And then I'm told, brother, we got to work on this other stuff. I was joking with people at lunch today. You know, we can chew gum and walk at the same time. And then it's very clear. It's very interesting, and I want you to know something too. That I'm gonna give you some of the pressures that I know you're going to encounter when you do intersectional work. Because I want you to know what you're getting into, MacArthur. I want you to know what's going to happen to you when you do this kind of work. But one of the things that's very clear is that, but I think they can handle it. One of the things very clear though is that these people that you're working with, they know about your identities. They know what you're working on. Don't sleep. They know what you're working on. So this organization, Isaiah, that does the anti-racism work, they are gearing up for the next year's legislative session. And they're getting ready for the election. So they want all of us to be working on what they call their issues conference. It's a great idea. We're talking about economic justice, we're talking about education, we're talking about all of the things that lead to inequality that we're going to be dealing with, we're going to be bringing to the legislature and bringing to elected officials. And so I was involved in the planning, and we were going to these planning meetings. It was great. Everyone was, really working on how we're going to do this. And then, everything's going fine. And then I get a letter in the mail from Isaiah. And I said, oh, I was just with them last week. And I wonder what they said. And I thought, well, maybe it's just their marketing material or whatever. No, it was a very nice worded letter that we have chosen the date of our issues conference. And it just happens to be on Pride Day, when All God's Children does the worship in the park. And we hope you can make it and send some of your people. We are aware that it's Pride, but we hope you can send some of your people. And that's what I mean about asking you to make one part of your identity more fundamental than the other. And aware that you have an obligation and a service to another part of what you're doing. And that's just one example of what happens when you do this work and when you're asking people to let you bring all of who you are, that all of the parts of your identity have the same and equal voice in the space, and then have a coalition that is willing to say, hey, I want to help you deal with that issue because I know you're going to be counted on to help us deal with this issue. It's very difficult. I just want to lift up the pressures that are involved and the things that, honestly, I have to tell you, it is a day-by-day challenge, and you have to, summon all that you have to deal with. The truth is, I want to be included in the room. I want to be invited back. I want to engage that work with all of these communities. And so some of the way you have to deal with this, I love what Dr. Jackson said this morning. You want to be able to, flip out and give what you want to say. But I want to get invited back. And I can still hear my mama say, watch what you say, baby. The second thing is, and this is a pressure you're going to have, your instinct and your calling to work in an integrated way on the issues that you care about is a good instinct. That's the prophetic call on you. Your instinct is right. But, and you yourself know by the way that you live and witness in this world, you know that all of these identities have a perfect complementarity to it. They're not disaggregated in the way that the world wants you to do it. You know that. But all around you, people are going to be telling you, organizations and other advocates are going to be telling you in word and action that there is not enough energy for it. There's not enough resources, and you're going to be hearing that. You're like, am I crazy? I mean, is it me? But they're going to be telling you that, and I want you to continue to hold that instinct, that your instinct to work in an integrated way, that's the good instinct. You are a whole integrated person, and that's the instinct that you're going to have to cultivate. And the third thing I want you to know, the pressure is the application of all of this. You're going to have to learn the art of making it happen when it can happen. Striking when the fire is hot. One of the things that has happened to us as we moved to the Twin Cities, and it's been only 8 months, doing this work, a lot of people have asked me to go to the state capitol to speak at rallies and that. And the first one was with RCRC to do a reproductive justice statement. And I was happy to do that. And the reason I wanted to do it was because the key here is to make it all happen when you can. Because again, the pressure is going to be on you to make something more fundamental than the other. And it'll be sometimes easy to fall into that and saying, okay, I'm working on LGBT issues right now, and that's where we're going to go. And I haven't spoken on LGBT issues yet in the state capitol. I haven't done that even yet. Other things I've been talking about. And so I want you to remember that, take that opportunity, go ahead, do that work in whatever issue you have the opportunity to do it, so that people can see that you are, by application, a person who works in the intersection. They can see you doing it. And then finally, it's exhausting. But I go back to the instinct and the calling. You have the instinct and you have the calling, and I want you to cultivate that. And finally, I'm going to close by saying there's an ongoing tension and challenge. MacArthur and Keisha both said that. But the tension is, you're going to have the tension with others. There's going to be this tension, and be prepared for it. The tension with others who claim to be interested in justice. And I know that's a biased statement, but I'll tell you why I say it this way. They claim to be interested in justice, but because of their religious, cultural, and social, and racial biases, will be completely unable and unwilling to allow room and space for voices on the margins. Anybody who is unwilling and unable to allow space for voice in the room on the margins just aren't that interested in justice. They can say it all day long. But as soon as you tell me that we can't get, everybody can talk, we can always find a way to hear and have a conversation. But anyway, where you see the complete unwillingness, that's the tension you're going to encounter. You can break it out. My sisters and brothers over here can break it down, keep breaking it down, keep fighting it. But you're going to run into that tension when people say, and they're going to tell you, justice, 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 justice. They're going to keep saying it. But you have to be clear. If they are unwilling and unable to allow room and space for voices on the margins, you have to, that word justice is not what was motivating them. Second, the challenge. It is going to be a challenge for some people to comprehend the complexity of people who live at the intersection. It is complex. Yeah, it's not easy. It's not easy walking around as a tall black gay queer man from Mississippi in MCC with Pentecostal background. It is not. That is a very complex. And all of our plenary presenters, all of them spoke to that. We are in all of our identities complex people. And the challenge is to explain to people, to get people to say, hey, wait a minute. Yeah, it is. You have to comprehend the complexity and the interaction of all the significant and meaningful identities that I walk with. All of the voices that I represent, all the spaces I represent. Yes, you have to take the time and energy to hear it and to allow it to show up. Thank you. I'm going to move longer.
So I want to take about 25 seconds of my time, recognizing that all of us have been sitting for quite some time, and ask that we just simply stand together, take a good stretch and a good breath. Or did that help out a little bit? Thank you so much. Serve my purposes also. So I want to share briefly. We've heard quite a bit, and so I want to share, but I want to invite you to do me two favors before I speak. After giving you the opportunity to stand, I want to ask two favors of you. The first one is those of you that have not, if you looked in your bag, in your conference bag, there were two cards in that bag. They look something like this. I know you can't see if you're too far in the back. Okay? And I want you to know that Many Voices has provided and presented and created these cards for use for individuals and their families and their congregations, with friends and neighbors who may have questions. And because Many Voices created them and they are for sale, and we're here at PAD, we made an executive decision that for those that would go to the website and order, they come in packs of 50 or packs of 10. If you order a pack of 50 to share in your congregation, today and today only, 30% off for the order of those packets. 30% off. And so go to the Many Voices website, order them and share them broadly. Tell everyone that you know that's not in the room today. So we're going to go until midnight. So they're not here right now. You can order and still get that discount. The second thing I would like to ask a favor of you is when you go to that website, right on the right-hand side, there's a pledge to raise our voice. And I'm going to ask you, if you have your smartphone or your iPad with you, you can go even right now and sign that pledge. You'll read the pledge and understand why it's available for you to sign. And you'll get the import of that pledge if you'll go and sign. So I'm asking you to do me those two favors. Is that okay? All right. So now to my comments and remarks. Now, when we talk about intersectional justice, we've done a good job thus far. But I want to go to the theme of our time together, be the change. Now, we've heard that change has already happened in some instances. We've also heard that we are the change we desire to see. So then I think Jill Scott might be accurate in that one is a magic number. The way to start a revolution is with that number 1. We've heard today from Dr. Jackson about self-love. And the reality is self-love is not being selfish. Self-love is essential to the possibility of loving anyone else. And so in order to do this thing we call intersectional justice, we must recognize that we are one, and that one is a very powerful one. And we must come to a place of self-love, because from the place of self-love, all of the possibilities flow. But loving oneself requires deep and profound work. We also heard that today. Because if you've not done the work, when you encounter the challenges and intransigencies that exist in trying to do coalitional work, you'll become extremely frustrated, quite hostile, and quite likely have a combustive moment. And so doing that self-work is extremely essential to being able to be engaged in the work of justice. Justice also starts with oneself. If you are not being just and fair to yourself, how in the world can you honestly and authentically work for justice for anyone else? Harriet got free. And conversely, she was able to go back and free others. Harriet got clear that carrying a gun was not a violation, but was a necessity in order to help free somebody. So she had to have a tool available for use in freeing others. Ours is a heritage of deep devotion to freedom and liberation, I believe. Taking seriously deliverance for the captive and the oppressed. Seeking sustained salvation, not a one-time hit it and quit it, but sustained salvation for all of our people. Caring about those that are considered the least and treated as the least and the left out. Healing for the body and for our souls' diseases. Is anybody's soul diseased? Uganda, is your soul diseased? Nigeria, is your soul diseased? Chicago, is your soul diseased? Washington, D.C., is your soul diseased, bothered, upset, pained, sometimes agonizing over the circumstance and situation we find ourselves in, be that LGBTQIAA, be that straight identified. Is your soul diseased by the circumstances and situations people are facing in our world, in our communities, next door, in our bedroom? Intersectionality is not just a fancy phrase, it's the way we live our lives. So, having established those realities, what is Many Voices doing to make a difference? I work for this organization, Many Voices, a Black church movement for gay and transgender LGBT justice. We're facing people's fears and helping them face their own fears. I want to couch this part in this reality. We are familiar with the phrase Jericho Road. We understand the history around the Jericho Road. There was a dangerous road. It was understood and known to be a dangerous road. And there was this traveler that came down the road, fell upon a horrible situation, harmed, beaten, robbed. And there were those that were traveling the road that passed by the person that was harmed. And we actually celebrate the Good Samaritan who paused and lent some assistance, doing charitable and benevolent work. But the question that story raises for me and for most of us nowadays is, why, knowing that the road was dangerous, didn't somebody think about what could we do to make that road safer for travelers? Now, it might have been that, well, the road was not in my immediate vicinity. I live in Southwest, and the road is in Northeast. And why should I be concerned about what happens on the Jericho Road in Northeast when I live in Southwest? Because over here in Southwest, our roads are perfectly fine. They're smooth and paved and well lit, and we are doing just, why should I care? Because, well, see, the reality is, if there's a Jericho Road existing anywhere, that's a problem. It's a challenge, and it's incumbent upon us to care about the Jericho Road, whether it's in our neighborhood or in somebody else's neighborhood. Intersectional justice says and suggests that whether the issue is directly, in my view, my issue, if it's an issue for anybody, it's my issue. But we're doing well. We're making strides. Brown versus Board of Education, we succeeded 60 years ago. But children still are not being well educated. And actually, schools are being resegregated. And the gaps are getting wider, not narrower. And some of those children that are being educated are LGBTQIA, and some of them are not, but they're all my children. So the final part is this. So I do the work at Many Voices. I love what I do. I love having colleagues and peers and working across interests and working with various organizations and groups in collaboration, because in my mind, the only way to get this work done is if all of us work together. So I'm not interested in fighting over turf, because I don't have any turf. It's all our turf, because we live on terra firma. This is our earth. But I didn't arrive at this point, dropped out of my mother's womb, and there I was having a revelation. It wasn't like that. Where I am today is not where I've always been. Can I be truthful about that? So now in 1994, I was in Washington, D.C., working my first really good job in Washington. You get the good job. You probably get the good job. You do the first job, and then you want to. And I was working a good job. I was happy, making some money, and I received this envelope with this letter. And I was happy to get the letter. This was a friend from college who, at Emerson College, was an out gay man choreographer, dancer, and at that time I hadn't quite figured out what was what. But we did become friends. And so Darren went on and graduated, and Darren sent me this letter. And I wrote him a good job, and I read the letter, and he's being very nice and kind and thoughtful, like telling me what's going on with him since he graduated and congratulating me on the new job. And then at the end, said, I was just thinking about you yesterday. And the gay movement for rights could really use someone with your power to lead us forward. Have you ever considered it? Talking about being a change. I got my good job. And I love the Lord. And I was preaching the gospel. I was doing good work. And this man sends me a doggone letter. Have you not, the gay rights movement could use someone with your power to lead us forward. First of all, the us got to me because I'm like, I didn't tell you. Then the invitation, we need someone with your power. What power? I have no power. I still owe student loans. Do you understand? And then ever consider it. And I, in my mind, I'm like, first of all, I don't want to be a part of a movement. I want to earn some money, create a nice life, live peaceably with all men as much as possible. We'll go to scripture when we don't want, we'll go right to scripture. This is the truth of intersectional justice work now. I did not arrive here just whole and complete now. And so I pondered, and I thought, now first of all, okay, I'm going to write Darren back and tell him, I love you, I thank you for honoring that you believe I have power. But no, this is not what I'm interested in. And then I thought, well, he's asked me to consider, and I am a Christian, so I should probably pray. Now see, that was when I made the biggest mistake. I considered it. And I reckoned that I ought to pray. And I could hear my mama in the back of my mind saying, when God presents an opportunity. And see, that's when it got to be we, and then I'm like, well. And then I got persuaded after the prayer that there might be something I could do. And then the music started. And so, hallelujah. And then I took my second really good job. Because I left my first good job. And I didn't do anything, but I guess you could think about it. Took my second good job, went on the job, was going to work on religious liberty at Americans United for Separation of Church and State. I took that job, and on that job, I had a portfolio that dealt with public education, welfare, because the Welfare Reform Act was coming up. And then my boss came to me and said, the Religious Coalition for Reproductive Choice is beginning a summit called the National Black Religious Summit on Sexuality. And I want you to go to the meeting. So yes ma'am. I went to the meeting, and I thought I'd just do a report back. I took notes and I reported back. And she took the notes and said, okay. And then she said, I'd actually like you to keep your eye on this. It's not under your portfolio, but I want you to keep your eye on it. I said, okay. And then I got a call from Reverend Colton Beasley and Leslie Watson Malcott. And they said, Cedric, we would like for you to actually sit on the advisory board for the National Black Religious Summit on Sexuality. And I'm still saying, oh, okay, I get sexuality, fine. I mean, you know, I still don't have to be the leader of the movement. I joined the board, I served on the board, and the first summit that I participated in, they said, Cedric, we're going to do a panel on homosexuality and the black church. And we would like for you to be the one to take care of that. And I was in the movement. And I have been in the movement ever since. The point is this: the very thing that you think you cannot do, the very thing you seek to shun, God provides for you all that you will need to do just that. And so whether you are a willing part of the movement, a reluctant part of the movement, whether you want to be on the sideline, the fact of the matter is you have skin in this fight. Be you gay or straight identified, you have skin in this fight, because every human rights issue is our united joint issue, and we can do nothing but be intersectional in what we do. And to not do that is to betray the true meaning of justice.
So we were thinking, because we've been going a little bit for a little while, that we might take a break now. Take the 20-minute break now, come back, hear from our last two speakers, and then do some Q&A, and not get into breakout. It's like, because there's so many folks, and folks might have so many questions, that it might make more sense for us to just stay together as a larger group. Once we come back from the break, do you guys feel, the last two speakers, do you guys feel okay about doing that? Yeah, does that feel good? Great. So we're going to take the break now. We will take the 20-minute break like we ordinarily do. Come back, hear from Dr. Martin, Dr. Broadus, and perhaps we can put some of the breakout session questions up and we can respond to them and hear from our panelists. Does that sound good? All right. It says it's 3:15 right now. Okay, so it's around 3. So in 20 minutes, which is 3:35, we should be back in here, ready to hear from our last two speakers. Thank you, everybody. And then we are going to open it up to questions, thoughts, and reflection. We're going to put the breakout session questions up one at a time. And so if folks have questions for the panelists based on what they talked about, or if you want to respond to those questions as we put them up, feel free to do that. We'll make a mic available at that time. Thanks. Can you hear me? Is it on? Right into it. It's on.
Michael said that I could make a quick announcement. So 2 things I left on my cards. So if you would like to get in contact with me to talk some more, because I do have a flight to catch, my email address is queerseminarian@gmail.com. And the second thing was someone who had to leave asked me to ask this question or to pose it based on what I talked about in regards to the environmental justice piece of part of reproductive justice. And so it's going to come out in the form of a charge, something that we can be doing. All weekend long we have been here enjoying great hospitality and lots of great water that came in plastic bottles. recycling is something that is simple and may seem small, but can make a huge difference in us being good stewards of this earth and ensuring that the next generation grows up in a healthy and safe environment. So just something to keep in mind, and I thank you all.
I just want to share a little bit about myself and to give. They got to do it upstairs. Oh, okay. Can you hear me? Can you hear me down here? Okay. I can hear me now. I want to thank Cedric because what he talked about movement, I want to talk about in a little bit more detail. My entire vocation, coinciding with professional ministry, has been in social movements. Within a year after I came out of seminary, I went to work for the National Council of Churches. And I found myself 3 weeks after I started in Houston, Texas at the Women's National Conference, which was the U.S. country conference for the 1980 UN Conference on a Decade of Women. And that was during the time of the rise of the radical right, which was really religious. My favorite people were people like Phyllis Schlafly, okay? And the orange juice lady. The Floridians remember her, okay? Okay? And many other groups who were coming out of the Heritage Foundation and other conservative think tanks like that. And I was a very young black feminist. I won't tell you how young in those days, but one of the things that was immediately evident was there needed to be an intersection between black and white women at that conference in order to get the pro-plan adopted instead of the platform of the women in the radical right, which included a large number of women in the Christian right. Now, this was the right that was built up. It took a long time to prepare itself after Barry Goldwater. And so they had gotten, by 1977, they were ready to throw Carter out of office in the White House. They were building representation in the House of Representatives. And they were priming to have Ronald Reagan run for president. So those were the cast of characters. And one of the things that happened was that nobody believed the church was going to be involved in that. So we made ourselves some little bibs, and we put on it Feminists of Faith. And we stood on either side of Dr. Dorothy Height, who was president of the National Negro Women. And what Dr. Height did, Dr. Height could find a press conference. If you didn't know where it was, you just say, Dr. Height, there's a press conference, and she would zoom in on it. I wanted her antenna. But we stood on the ends of a group of religious women led by Dr. Height that said, no, no, no. The Christian right, the radical right, are not talking about poor women's issues. They're not talking about sterilization abuse being done. That's an early one for Letitia. Anti-sterilization abuse movement. We were talking about that earlier yesterday or today. The Welfare Rights Organization, WRO, was still a strong organization. And the right wasn't talking about any of that in their platform. They were talking about family values. And I thought, I was very young and naive, and I thought, aren't those family values? Yeah. Welfare rights and, anti-sterilization abuse. Women would go into public hospitals and give birth, and after they had given birth, before they were fully conscious, they'd have their tubes tied. I thought all those were
family values. So that was sort of my immediate initiation into social movements, because I came into relationship to the mainline white feminist movement of now, into the radical lesbians in terms of the work they were doing in the DC area, the welfare rights organization in New York State, particularly in New York, and racial justice issues, because I had been handed a bail bond fund to use as money for people of color who were put underneath the jails instead of who were guaranteed the right to the Eighth Amendment to have reasonable bail. And so I got to meet all these different folks working in different groups, and then the denominations began to call me to come in and do justice workshops with them. So my initiation into my vocation as an ordained minister was a hot moment in the parish at that time, and I became a church executive. After that stint in working against domestic violence and Take Back the Night and sex prostitution tourism, about U.S. bases in the Philippines and in Japan, where women were bought and sold for sex. All these things were happening to me as a young woman. I finally said, the problem is I'm earning more money, not cash, but I had more benefits by eating off of a corporate credit card, by living in Columbia University housing, than women had who I was struggling to help get their rights. So the Holy Spirit went, and she wasn't talking about a V8. I had a wonderful woman who invited me to stop dating her and to become her partner. And so she gave me an out. I mean, this was a really painful economic decision about my participation in unjust economic systems, including the way that, I mean, the church didn't pay a whole lot, let's be clear, okay? But the fact that I could live in New York City on something like $9,000 a year and not go broke was easy. In 1977 to 1981, it was easy. So I became the director of campus ministries at Temple University. And there I worked on issues of economic justice when I belonged to the Center for Ethics and Social Policy. And we worked with unemployed steel mill workers from places like the Hershey, Pennsylvania steel mills, which closed. And we worked with people who worked at Botany 500 up on North Broad Street in the heart of North Philadelphia, who had lost their jobs in the textile industry. And by the time I left Philadelphia in 1992, Philadelphia had lost 100,000 or more traditional industrial manufacturing jobs that paid good working class and middle class wages. And all of a sudden I had found myself involved with the labor movement. And when Temple security workers struck, they took my office with a Xerox machine so that they could send out their publicity. And when the professors struck and wanted to join the American Association of University Professors, they used my office too for their Xerox machine. So it was like everything I did. I couldn't believe my life. I said, this is becoming too much. Then the World Student Christian Federation called me and asked me to become the advisor to the Interregional Women's Conference of the World Student Christian Foundation, which were all the regional in Africa, Asia, Europe, and Latin America, to be the advisor to those women who came together. And the first fight I had to fight was to deal with the European lesbians, white lesbians, and the black African women. Not fun. Because the white European lesbians knew that I was a lesbian, but the African women thought I was part of the diaspora, so of course I'd be working with their issues. And social movements, what we were doing in the United States and the ones I talked about, was nothing compared to bartering that issue with the World Student Christian Federation. Years of campus ministry took me through Tiananmen Square and the Chinese Revolution and the Chinese students who were studying there at Temple University. It took me through the black student organizing for the neighborhood which Temple University had taken in North Black Philadelphia for more campus room, and so on and so forth. I found myself, as I had gone into my PhD, involved in interfaith worker justice. And it wasn't just interfaith worker justice, it was the new poor people's labor movement, which is going on now. Immigrants, undocumented workers, HB2 visa women, as well as poor working class white and poor black women. And so my whole life has been about the social movements and how to stand with them. Most importantly, what I want to say is we need to understand the history of social movements in the United States. The United States has a terrible history. Most of our folks have amnesia when it comes to social rights movements, and the civil rights movement was a prototype for a new social rights movement that this country had never seen before. I got to tell these stories because this is important. One, we might have used the old mimeograph machines in churches to get out information, but we also had the new technology of the television. Those two things, the role of the church and the media, gave the civil rights depth and breadth that was really important. The second thing is to challenge everybody's vision all the time, to keep it expanding. I read the mission statement of the conference and of the MCC values, and they're right on. But values are all renewable resources when you come up against people who don't believe in your values. And they may be the people you're in coalition with who want to kill you, as Bernice Johnson Reagan said. The important thing, the third important thing, was that they used, as part of the vision in the civil rights movement, the liberal, and I mean with a capital L as in coming out of the Enlightenment, not what they call, you were a goddamn liberal. Not that kind of liberal. But the whole Enlightenment movement is liberal, in contrast to what came before it. So they used the American ideals of the liberal Enlightenment movement called democracy. And the brothers held signs that said, I am a man. And Ella Baker stood up and said, for every white woman's son, we need to care about a black woman's son. All right? And then the women got mad and they joined SNCC along with the more radical brothers, and they talked about building a bond of brothers and sisters. They talked about building a circle of trust. So that became part of the vision, and on and on. And of course, as you know, the vision kind of ended with the I Have a Dream speech that the sons of ex-slaves and the sons of slaveholders will one day sit at the same table. And Brother Martin talked about the beloved community. We moved to the student movement, to the anti-Vietnam movement, where the biggest visual, cultural impact was the numbers count of U.S. dead on the television screen every Friday evening on CBS. The women's movement, Take Back the Night, the anti-rape part of the movement, okay? Equal pay for equal work, part of the economic justice movement, and still the welfare rights movement. That was the beginning that put a whole lot of folks, including 1969, on the radar screen in terms of the Christopher Street beginning of gay liberation movement, and on and on. I just want to say that in the late 80s and early 90s, we had the anti-globalization movement against the World Trade Organization, the World Bank, and the International Monetary Fund. And you remember the big demonstrations that were held in Paris, in Seattle, and in New York, where thousands of people came to protest what was called structural adjustment, which was taking away the low-level capital, intensive labor of peasants in the third world and forcing governments to become capital intensive to produce food and products for our world. Inside the U.S., the structural adjustment movement was called Reaganomics. And people forget that we too didn't have to have those instruments. We were part of those big global instruments, but we too were under structural adjustment with the slashing of all social programs. In 2011, what the media called the Arab Spring, which Arabs call the Arab Awakening, Tunisia, Egypt, parts of Turkey and other countries began to talk about contextual democratic rights and getting out from underneath oligarchies and dictatorships. And by the fall of 2011, we had occupied Wall Street. We'll occupy the streets, we'll occupy the courts, we'll occupy the offices that you sit in. The bidding of the many, not the few, but we are the many, you are the few, we are the 99%. I only talk about social movements because, as the MCC and every other church that deals with social justice knows, we have to recreate a vision for the time. The beloved community was a utopian vision. The visions today are dystopic after the conflagration. Just think about the Hunger Games, all right? The most recent, the Hunger Games. But the creating of a vision that captures the imagination, in 1963, it was integration, redemption, and democratization American style. Today, it is a different kind of vision that if you think about the 99%, it's a way of talking about what people don't want to talk about, and that's class in the United States. And the movement was democratic in the sense that it was done by consensus. We have never done those kinds of things in this country before. And don't think the Occupy movement is dead, because it is not. They are trying to figure out, in many parts of the city and across the globe, where they were in the stock exchanges of Tokyo, London, Buenos Aires, and in New York, how to deal with the questions of big banks, big financial institutions, and government bailouts that was all public money. Second thing, cultural icons. What cultural icons will we share with the people who aren't LGBTQI and are not also Christian? When we do our community work in building the movement, we need to be really much more sophisticated than we are about the Buddhists, about the Muslims in particular, and even the left wing of the Roman Catholic Church. Because they have a long history of social movement, particularly in the labor movement. And we need to re-engage the labor movements as churches, not just through interfaith worker justice, but the Catholic Church and the Presbyterian Church and the Episcopal Church, because they were the mill churches of the 19th and 20th century who helped keep labor alive in those places. And lastly, I want to say that people went through the fear in those movements. They went through the dogs and the water cannons and the police. They went through terrible examinations in hospitals in the Take Back the Night, part of the feminist movement. They were chastised by the right wing in the LGBT movement and in the marriage equality movement, and we are winning that one, beginning with my state, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. But there is more. And the issue is that when you go through the fear, we need to go through as whole people. We used to talk about being twofers. We used to talk about multiple oppressions, or the hit parade of oppressions. Then we talked about the interrelationship of all justice issues, and now we're talking about the intersectional justice. You need to understand that that's about movement and getting new language to meet the new times, cultural symbols to meet the new times, and visions that meet the new times while remembering where we came from. Because that is power as well. All these folks have talked about the church. I'm challenging the church to do social movement differently now. Because we're in a different age and in a different time. And if you want to talk more about that, call me up or send me an email.
Good afternoon, everyone. Sorry about that. I have a loud voice also. And most times talk to a classroom the size without a microphone. So I'm honored to be here, and thank you for having me, and thank you for the invitation. I'll try to keep my remarks briefly because we do need some audience interaction. I know you have been sitting for quite a while. I'm honored also to be with a panel of esteemed people, one who has taken to the audience. I was just here about 3 weeks ago at Emory at the Black Civil Rights Conference, just, I guess, across the way. There are lots of thoughts circulating in my head about this. I am the obvious trans person on the panel. If not, I'm obvious now. And make no shame about it. Everybody's told you a little bit about them, so I'll tell you a little bit about me. I come from a very proud family, the broadest family. And one thing about my parents and my mother, I just lost a little 6 months ago, who were always with me at everything that I do, very much so. And I felt them here today with me. They made me the strong person that I am. And for trans people, I think a part of intersectionality that you need to understand, because the trans movement is probably, honestly, nobody has a calculator. I became a lawyer because I don't do math. Yeah, go ahead and clap for that, that's true. And I unabashedly give you the truth, so I hope I don't offend anybody, and if I do, well, that's just what it is. We're probably 10 to 15 years behind the LGBT movement. I think you need to keep that aware in intersectionality work. Is that as we do this work, one of the things that I've found, particularly in the people of African descent, because that's where we are today, right, is that we tend to not think about that with trans people. I've been in the trans movement for a long time, and as I don't know who said it, but I'm having age issues right now. I'm thankful to be on this planet. But one, as a trans person, I never thought I'd make it this far. That's a reality of being trans, just as it used to be a reality of being gay and lesbian, and it's a true reality of being trans. I was lucky to make it to 30, and every day past 30, I was thankful. And then one day I was like, wow, I'm disabled. Wow, that's amazing. And I am thankful for that. So I'm dealing with that right now, so give me space to do that. And if you don't, that's okay too. But I think we need to be cognizant of that. And so it's the fortitude of family and the strength of family and friends that allows us that longevity for trans people. And I think that's an intersectionality that we need to be aware of, the intergenerationality and the support of families, stumbling on my words because I'm extremely tired and I won't share with you the horrific journey to get here, but as Brother Cedric shared with me, that journey must have made it worth it all. So I'm thankful because I intended to be here a few days ago, but the airline was not going to make that. And that's okay. I am very honored to be here. I always love the PAD conferences. And that's very important. As I make jokes, I always do, but to trans people. And so I think we need to be more aware of that and embracing. And that when you do this work in your congregations, outside your congregations, you need to be aware of that for trans people and open to that for trans people. And also, when I've done speeches and do Black Pride, how when I walk into the room and they go, oh, cute gay man, and they're all embracing. And then when I say, I'm Kyler and a trans man, how the room clears out. That's not cute. And we need to be very aware of that. And I'm not talking 10 years ago. I'm talking today. And that it happens not with communities of, I'm talking in our community. Okay, in our community, let me just define that for you. I'm talking people of African descent. Okay? So we need to clean that up because we need to take ownership of that. Why is that okay that we have been oppressed? As Reverend Joan just alluded to, we used to talk about oppressions, that we've been oppressed. So why do we feel it's okay then to oppress others? We suffer from multiple oppressions, just being brown and black or whatever colors we want to own and walking down the street. And because I'm high yellow, by the way, I'm going to throw that in too, because we're talking about intersectionality, okay? And I always work from all levels of intersectionality. It don't matter, I'm still a black man, okay? And it don't matter what kind of suit I'm in, how I dress, they still follow me around in Dillons, okay? When I used to walk from the 2 blocks to the courthouse, which used to be a few months ago, little old ladies hit the wall like I was going to steal their purse. And for those of you that know, I've always joked that I will steal one in my lifetime just because I'm expected to. Okay? So let's not make these assumptions and continue to work with this intersectionality piece here, that because somebody looks a certain way, we're going to make assumptions about them. Or because somebody doesn't look a certain way, we're going to make assumptions about them. And so I want you to be very clear about that and very aware about that, particularly from the community I come from, which is trans people. And particularly trans people of color who get a double-edged sword, because as we work with our non-people of African descent, they treat us bad. And then we got to come to our own community that treats us bad. And you may say, well, Kyler, they don't treat you bad. Well, I'm here to tell you, yeah, they do. Because I tell them they do too. Because, you know, Kyler has no problem telling people what Kyler thinks. And if you're mistaken, just try. Okay? Because to live in this body and to walk this journey, I have to tell you what I think. Or I could not continue to live this daily journey. And I'm not saying your journey is any less difficult, but I'm saying to walk my walk, I have to do what I need to do. And so I want you to be aware of that. And that's why I do feel like Harriet Tubman. And I continue to go back as people perceive that I have made it. Because I have not made it until every one of my people has made it out. So that's why Brother McCarthy spoke to me when he took the podium earlier today. It's like, yes, Brother McCarthy, say it. And he heard me say that because he was speaking to me. People say, well, you could get back in that shiny BMW, which I was driving in corporate America. But they didn't want me there either, even though I looked the same, had a little bit more hair on my head, wore exactly the same suit. And all I said was I was coming out, which shouldn't have been a surprise to them, because you know what? Guess what? Brother Broadus looked exactly the same as he did before he legally transitioned, as he did after. I can show you pictures. Because when I tried to wear the girl drag, it was indeed drag, my friends. I can show you pictures and we'll all be laughing. What was you thinking, Kyla? What was you thinking? I was trying to fit in, trying to pretend in a world that wanted me to pretend to be somebody that I was never meant to be. Little kids would come up to me and customers for the company I worked for and say, sir, no matter what kind of shirt I wore. And when my father passed, who was my soulmate and very best friend, I got rather large. And so then I started to sprout some big, breasts, which I didn't think looked fine on me, by the way. And you can take that for what it was. They looked fine on everybody else, but surely not on me. And people would still say, sir. So that should give you a read of who I was meant to be. And clear to me, always, from ever since I could have a memory of who I was meant to be. So, again, our callings were predetermined of who we were meant to be. Even though I wanted those golden handcuffs, as Brother Cedric sat down and talked about, even though I was going to be that corporate lawyer and had the red shiny BMW and made the 6 figures, but I lost that a long time ago, Brother Cedric, when they were like, we do not want your kind here in this building or this place, no matter how good of a job I did. And by the way, I still have those glowing reviews of my work performance in my garage, or actually now in storage in Missouri, because I could not believe, as much as I hid behind my work to hide and try to conform to what society thought I should be, so that I could prevent who I should be, who I was, of what I needed to do. And that's why I'm here today. And that's why I've done the work I've done now for decades at much, much less. And those student loans continue to call, as Brother Cedric says, because it was not meant to be for me to sit in that corporate office and make all that money, as greatly as that sounds, because money doesn't really mean a thing to me at all. Nor did that silver or whatever colored car I had, or that fancy car. Because it is about the work and about leading people to liberation. And I bring my full self, and I am going to, because I always speak from my heart, which is always what this is about. But it is about us understanding that trans work is intersectionality at all levels. That I didn't leave my Christianity, my Buddhism, my Catholicness, my whatever religiosity that I had when I decided to transition, nor my intelligence, which most people always do to me. And it was cool when I was a private practitioner. Well, it wasn't cool, but I used it to my advantage. But it gets old, okay? I'm a 50-year-old man, and I'm really tired of it, okay? I take it from everybody, and I'm really sick of it. I just talked to Brother McCarthy before I took the stage today, and I'm like, brother, I'm tired of being perceived as stupid. Okay, it really gets old. I have a Juris Doctorate degree. I've been a professor for over 20 years. I've done so many things. I've worked in corporate America, I've run my own business, but in every aspect, just